Welcome to Satsang.
Hello, Vishrant. Can you please talk about the topic, why do you need a spiritual teacher?
Mostly because it's almost impossible to raise your consciousness levels without a guide. Because the mind itself dreams, and dreaming is lower consciousness. People don't recognize that their thinking keeps them locked in lower consciousness. Without a guide, how would you know which way to go? It's like being lost in the jungle. You would be better off with a guide to get you out than trying to work it out yourself. For me, I've had guides since I was 19 years old. I've had people who are further ahead on the path, showing me the way, showing me the obstacles that I was creating inside myself, my limiting belief systems that kept me in contraction and failing. And without these teachers, I think I would have been lost. I was lucky enough to come in contact with people who were further ahead at a young age. And I believed what they were saying and I followed their instructions. And as a result, consciousness levels started changing. And at the age of 28, I came in contact with my spiritual master, Osho Rajneesh, then called Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. And his guidance allowed me to go beyond the mind. His guidance took me to Satori. And for that, I am absolutely grateful. Showed me a whole nother way to live this life. But I don't think without his guidance, much would have changed because I'd been sent to a private school. I'd been shown how to win, how to succeed in the world. And I did. And I found out that there is nothing there in success. It's a hollow victory. I discovered that everything that I'd been taught that I believed would bring happiness was not actually true. You don't get happier because you get wealthy. You don't get happier because you get more successful. As a matter of fact, if you're programmed to be successful, more than likely you're chasing your tail constantly to make it work, problem solving. And so as a meditator, which I learned from my show, I started to find the moment more beautiful than my future projections. Because business people, and I was a business person, tend to live to a large degree in projection, making it work for a later and missing the beauty of the now. And so learning to slow down, learning to be a meditator, being present to what is real was a big deal. And without someone telling me that I should do that, a guide in other words, and showing me how, well, it wasn't in my programming because it's not what I was taught at school. I was taught at school to be a success, to be a winner. And then getting into Western personal growth, learning how to be bigger, better, and more powerful with this illusion that somehow that was going to make me happy as well, which it doesn't. And so at the age of 28, most things that most people would want. I had houses, I had expensive cars, I had expensive yachts, I had retired from business because I was successful. But it was a hollow victory. It wasn't until I started to perceive heart, perceive love, that I realized there was something here that is very, very beautiful. And that is the way of the heart. That is the perception of love. And that kind of, in a lot of ways, goes counter to business, because business is, in a lot of ways, about becoming a war machine, competing against other people. And heart is all about, well, it's supported by openness, not by any form of defensiveness or closure. And this is a whole nother way to live. And so my teacher, Osho, was a heart teacher. He taught the way of the heart. And I followed his instruction. And if I hadn't followed his instruction, I'd probably still be a war machine, somehow trying to make myself feel good by patting myself on the back for my successes in life. But they don't bring you happiness. It is really love that can make you feel beautiful. It is love itself that is beautiful. And when you're in touch with love, when you're perceiving love, all you really want to do is take care of everyone and everything. It's very beautiful. But to support love, you have to be open. You can't support love when you're closed, when you're railing against the world, when you're in resistance. You can't support love then, because you've blocked yourself off from perceiving it. You've got too many filters in the way. And so, in taking down those filters, in taking down those defenses, what you're actually doing is setting yourself up for enlightenment, because you're removing the obstacles that are in the way. You're removing the things that contract you and keep you in resistance, locked in dream of some kind. And you're preparing the mind so it can support higher consciousness and support enlightenment. One of the first things that I learned was about victim-orientated thinking, which, of course, I'd grown up with, as most of us have. Seeing ourselves as victims of this, victims of that, victims of people, circumstance, victims of ourselves, and inevitably getting angry when things don't go our way because we get into the blame game. Well, what wasn't explained to me at school was that is lower consciousness. As a matter of fact, you can't get much lower than to get angry, because you've got a dream going where you're lost in this dream in a dark heaviness. And I'm so happy that I got taught this when I was young, because I was an angry young man. I had a bit of a hard time as a youth, and to actually see through victim orientated thinking and to see through anger, how it worked, why it worked, how it could actually be prevented, was brilliant. But without a guide, without someone showing me the way, with the upbringing that I had and the programming I had, I would have just remained the same until I died, which is what most people do from about the age of 20 onwards. They don't change much because their default patterns are in place. So for me, higher consciousness was brought about by having spiritual guides, by having people who are further ahead and who are willing to show me what they could see. So much gratitude there. As I look around me at my old friends that I went to school with and some of the people I used to hang out with, and they haven't changed much. If anything at all, they're the same as they were back then, doing the same things, talking in a lot of ways about the same subjects. Nothing's changed. Their consciousness levels have stagnated. If you want to find higher consciousness, hang out with people who have it. That's the best you can do for you. Any questions? Any statements? Any challenges to this teaching today?
First question is as follows. How do you choose a spiritual guide or teacher?
Difficult, very difficult. I was actually very lucky in that I stumbled across. I didn't even go looking for. I stumbled across Osho Rajneesh because he had a restaurant in Fremantle where my offices were. I had a publishing company in Fremantle, and there was a Zorba the Buddha restaurant around the corner that served really, really lovely vegetarian food. And I started visiting that, started wondering what was going on there with all these people wearing orange and wearing malas and wearing red colours. And after a while, I got to see that they were very friendly and very into partying. And at that age, at 28, I was into partying as well. I thought, well, this sounds good. And then I started listening to him. And I realized, wow, there's another way. There's another way to be in this world. This guy was very, very different. He was kind of free in a way I couldn't even imagine. And so the more I listened and the more I got involved, the more I was attracted to it, the more I started to think, wow, there's another path. I've got to follow this one. And so I did. I took sannyas. I became a Rajneesh sannyasin and ended up living in America with him in a couple of times and in Pune in India with him once. It was very, very opening. That's a good way of putting it. Because Osho has this washing machine called a mystery school. And you go into the mystery school and it shows you all about you. Things that you probably don't want to see, but you need to see because they're the obstacles that are in the way of your freedom. And that's up to you whether you're going to do that or not. But I got really involved. I loved it. It was such an amazing adventure. I'd have to call it an inward adventure.
What do you mean when you say it's a washing machine?
It cleanses you. Uh, we all think of ourselves as kind of okay to some degree, but when we really have a close look at ourselves, we find there's things that aren't working in our favor. There's things that are actually in our way, default patterns we've developed over our lifetime that are obstacles that create contraction, create resistance in life. And this washing machine washes it all clean. So it's just terminology for getting clean, getting clear, really. Finding a way to be in the world that is more effective and more conscious.
With so much information on higher consciousness and enlightenment available, can I raise my consciousness levels by just reading or watching talks?
Well, initially, that's what I did. I would listen to people and collect knowledge. And I found that I became knowledgeable as a result, but it didn't relate back to my real life. Knowledge doesn't change much. The only thing that really changes a human being is to practice something different to what they've been doing before. Uh, it is the practices that change people. The collection of knowledge makes you very knowledgeable, and you can answer questions on every subject you like if you study it. In spirituality, you meet people who can talk about enlightenment, they can talk about heart, they can talk about higher consciousness and how to get there, but they themselves aren't there because what they've done is collected knowledge instead of practicing. And so that they've got the booby prize. they've got knowledge, they're knowledgeable, but they're not advanced in consciousness because they haven't practiced anything that will facilitate that. And the practices that facilitate higher consciousness are witnessing the mind, meditation, self-inquiry, the practice of openness. These practices raise consciousness levels, but you have to actually practice them. You can't just think it's a good idea. You can't listen to a spiritual teacher talk and understand them and think that somehow that's going to change your life. What changes your life is practicing something different than what you've done before. And so for me, I started practicing what my teachers were talking about, removing limiting programs, not just seeing them and thinking I've seen through that and that's the answer, but actually removing them, taking them out because they're in the way. Practicing meditation, practicing watching the mind, practicing self-inquiry, and the practice of openness, which removes everything if you practice it thoroughly. This is what makes the difference.
Next, we have Neil who'd like to ask you a question.
Hello, Neil.
Hello, Vishrant. So when I'm practicing meditation, I sometimes feel uncomfortable when I'm sitting in the same posture for too long. And sometimes I do feel thirsty. I feel like drinking some water. So is it okay if I just take a break in between and do that? Or should I just ignore all those discomforts and continue with meditation?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's different schools of thought on that. Um, I I really like the Zen approach to meditation, and that's where you don't move, and at some point it becomes uncomfortable, and you surrender to the discomfort. And on the other side of that surrender is bliss. But that's a pretty harsh way to go. It's something that I like to do because I used to like to sit for 3 hours at a time without moving. And in the sitting and in the not moving and in the discomfort that might come, my mind started to learn unconditional surrender. It started to learn not to move, and awareness started to become aware of itself. And so it depends. It's like it depends what you're meditating for. I found that you can go beyond the mind by actually surrendering to whatever appears. But at the same time, for someone who's beginning meditation, it's probably a very good idea to be comfortable, so you don't turn yourself off it straight away. I find I find that I used to sit for hours upon hours and just bliss out. It's up to you. What do you want to do? What works for you? I don't think there's any rules that work. What works for you is the right thing to do.
Right. And I've got one more question. That is, don't you think there's a positive side to aggression and rage when it comes to survival? Because our ancestors have survived because there was a certain amount of aggression to protect their group from predators or something that's trying to attack them. So don't you think that aggression is a good thing too when it comes to survival?
Okay. So the thing about a mind that will support higher consciousness is a mind that doesn't contract. Now, if you can be aggressive and not contract, that's brilliant. But that takes a lot of practice because usually when we're being aggressive, we close inside, contract inside to protect ourselves from what might be coming back. But if awareness is on awareness, awareness will probably pull away from itself and come back to the mind. And so you train the mind to not contract. That doesn't mean that you become ineffective in the material world. You can still put up a force, but can you do it from openness instead of closure?
Right.
And so the trick is not to be life be out of it. and being effective. The trick is, can you actually be effective and strong in the material world from a place of openness inside?
Right. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Vishrant.
Okay.
Just a follow-on question. You were talking about Zen meditation. Are there more gentle ways of learning unconditional surrender?
Yeah, get into a relationship with someone you don't get along with and practice acceptance. Works well. Matter of fact, if you're prepared to see everyone as a teacher, anyone that does anything or says anything to you that creates contraction or resistance into you can become your teacher if you're willing to practice acceptance, if you're willing to undo the parts of your mind that are supporting that contraction. In other words, the belief systems. So everything can be used as your teacher, and everyone can be used as your teacher. You don't have to do it in meditation. You can do it with everything that happens in your life. I found that I learned more about surrender and more about acceptance of life in relationships than any other thing that I did.
Next, Abe, you'd like to ask a question.
Hi, Vishram.
Hello, Abe.
So when we find our teacher, there must be some attitude or the I basically what should be the right attitude for the student to be with the teacher?
Okay, so there has to be trust. And so it's very important that you find a teacher that you can trust. If you can't trust them, if you can't be open with them, that it's unlikely they're going to be able to teach you. And so you need to watch your teacher and see if your teacher walks their talk. Are they behaving the way they're teaching, or is there something else going on? And if they're walking their talk, you need to trust them. Because ultimately, if they're a spiritual teacher, they're going to be taking you into the unknown. And you have to be able to trust to step into the unknown. And so it's very important to trust the teacher, which means having a yes to the teacher. That doesn't mean that you don't challenge things, that you don't say, hey, what does that mean? You don't question, but it does mean that you trust. Questioning allows us to actually undo things inside ourselves. It's not just about going yes, it's also about understanding why things need to be undone and actually undoing them.
Okay. Thank you
So,
very much. Sorry.
so for me, I trusted my teachers. And some of them were a little faulty, but they had something that I wanted to discover. And so I trusted them in that area.
Okay. So when you say some of them were faulty, were there the teachers you are talking about when you were 19 years old, or the enlightened masters?
Now, I trusted the enlightened ones completely, pretty much. The one I had a lot of teachers who taught mystery school, and some of them were a little faulty. They had brilliant understandings and they were living them to a large degree, but in some areas they were caught. And in those areas, I didn't want to play. But the things that they could show me, I was very interested in. If they got caught too much, I'd have to leave them and find another teacher. Because over the years, I have had a lot of teachers. My main spiritual teacher was Osho Rajneesh, and I trusted him 100%. But some of the people under him, not so much. But still, they had something to offer. And I went and I followed instruction. And because I was willing to follow instruction and practice, things changed. If all we do is approach everything with doubt, we stay in our minds pretty stuck. We have to be able to leap. We have to be able to jump into the unknown.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vishrant.
Okay. Mind you, it's a love affair. It's a love affair.
Yeah.
The next question has been written by Warren. Can you talk about how to balance practicing acceptance versus becoming passive, or knowing when to walk away or make a different choice?
Yeah. I begin with acceptance of everything and then move to what I need to do. And so something's going wrong, I'm in acceptance that something's going wrong. And then I might move to change. But I'm moving from a place of acceptance. I'm not moving from a place of contraction. I'm not moving from a place of resistance. I'm moving from a place of acceptance. And because I'm moving from a place of acceptance, my mind is staying level. It's staying even. It's not getting uptight. It's not getting tense. A lot of people think that if they move to acceptance, they become ineffective. Not true. Just simply not true. You can move from acceptance and do everything in this world. You just have to practice it. And so you begin with everything that comes up inside of you and everything that comes out from outside of you with acceptance of what is. And this is the way to enlightenment. This is the way to higher consciousness, because you are producing a mind that will support it. It doesn't make you an ineffective human being, because we can still do things from acceptance, from openness.
You were speaking about trust. Is there anything else that is required to be with a spiritual teacher?
Trust will do. Trust will do. Trust itself is a form of surrender. You're you're putting aside your beliefs, your understandings, and you're trusting that someone who's further ahead is going to show you the right way. It's a bit like being lost in the jungle. You can kind of see that there's a way out over there, but the guide wants you to come around this way, because the guide knows that if you go that way, even though it's shorter, there's some quicksand or there's something there that's not good for you. And so you have to trust the guide. And so you trust the guide, and the guide walks you around. It takes a lot longer, but at least you don't get caught in quicksand. And so you have to trust. If you're with someone who's further ahead than you, you've got to believe that they know more than you about the way to go. And for me, when I got involved in, well, we'll call it super consciousness enlightenment, the only people I was really interested in listening to were people who were awake. Because if you weren't awake, you were also lost. And so I listened to the ones who were awake, because they'd got out. They'd found the way. They knew the way. And I trusted them because they had got out.
The next question is from Susha.
Hi, Vishrant.
Hello, Sush. Hello.
Hello. Um, was there any time that you had more than one teacher? And how did that work out for you?
Okay, so when Osho died in 1990, I actually felt that I'd lost my chance for enlightenment. I didn't stop practicing. I still continued to meditate daily. I self-inquired. I practiced openness. I practiced yoga. I practiced Tai Chi. I practiced Qigong. I practiced a lot of things. But after he died, about 8 years later, I got into Advaita Vedanta, which is from Ramana Maharshi, originally from Shankara. And I started listening to these teachers talk about enlightenment and talk about the way to enlightenment through self-inquiry. And I took Ramana on, who had died 4 years before I was born, as a teacher, and I studied everything that he taught, and I practiced everything that he taught. And then I started studying other people as well. He had a disciple called Papaji, who I also studied and followed his instructions as well. Even though I'd never met him, I was following them. I was practicing what he was teaching. And then the Advaita Vedanta people started coming to town, disciples of, or people who'd woken up with Papaji, Isaac Shapiro, Vartman, who'd woken up with Ganguji, I think, and Ganguji. And I would go and visit these people when they came to town and attend their retreats and listen to their talks. And I became a disciple of them. And when they were in town with Isaac and Bartman, I would actually host them. I'd have them stay at my house. I'd drive them around. I'd attend all their satsangs. And in so doing so, I gave myself to truth in serving them. And ultimately, someone who's awake is serving truth. That's what they do. They serve truth. And so slowly but surely, even though I had a few different teachers, they were all teaching the same thing. They were all teaching self-inquiry as a way to enlightenment. And I was really keen. I practiced self-inquiry constantly, asking the question, who's aware? What's aware? Until Satori after Satori after Satori. But before that had occurred, before these people had come to town, I'd already done the work on my mind. I'd already removed the belief systems that were contracting me. I'd already learnt surrender. And so my mind was very ready for Advaita Vedanta. And so after about a year or maybe a bit more, awakening occurred. There would have been 1,000 Satoris in between for the year, but then awakening occurred. The mind was just resting in beingness. It wasn't contracting to the world anymore. It wasn't in resistance. It was in surrender. And it is a surrendered mind that will support enlightenment. But I had many teachers. I have only named a few. I had many teachers. Anyone who was awake, I was interested in. Anyone, whether it was Sai Baba, Shanti Mai, the names go on, Ramesh Balsika. There were so many that I was interested in because they had the presence. And it is the presence of someone who's awake that you can die in and find yourself as truth.
In one of your talks, I heard you say that to have two masters is like riding two horses. So that was the reason I had this curiosity and asked you the question about multiple masters. So
Yes.
when it's time, you may jump. But yeah, so would you shed some light on that statement you made?
Yes. So to be with Osho and to be with anyone else would have been very difficult because Osho was absolutely unique. His teaching methodologies were all over the place. They weren't just one thing. Mind you, his main thing was witnessing the mind. So to go with another teacher with different understandings and different ideas would have been a problem. With the Advaita Vedanta teachers that I took on later, they were all teaching exactly the same thing. There wasn't a variance. They were all teaching self-inquiry as a way to enlightenment. There wasn't a difference, and so there was no clash, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And when you said that you had satori's, sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
When you said you had satori's, about some thousands of them prior to awakening, were those always happening in the presence of the teachers or even outside when you were not in satsang?
They were happening in the presence of the teachers, but they're also happening outside of Satsang. I'd be driving the car and suddenly I'd find myself as the universe, just without a teacher being present, because the readiness was there. You see, when someone's ready, they start experiencing self as pure awareness when they're ready. And this is the thing that a lot of people don't get. You have to prepare the mind. You have to remove the obstacles that are in the way for enlightenment to stay. And so there was such a readiness that when the first Advaita Vedanta teacher came into the room that I was in, into an auditorium, I woke up. And I hadn't had a Satori for 11 years before that. And all of a sudden, bang, back as the universe, back as everything again, back as nothing. And it was simply the presence of that awake teacher who was Isaac Shapiro at the time. And it was wonderful because it fired up such a thirst in me again for truth, because it had waned a little bit after Osho died, because I thought that I'd lost the chance for awakening in this lifetime.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all your help and shedding light on the two masters thing. Thank you.
The following question has been written by Kelly. If I remain as a witness of the body and mind as a whole, I notice my focus gets carried away easily. Is it too fast to jump? And should I just practice on focusing on a smaller area, for example, my breathing?
Okay, so what I developed was a witness of the mind that just watched the mind. So there was detachment from the mind. And because there was detachment from the mind could be seen clearly for what it was up to. And as it was seen clearly, consciousness levels started to rise. And that was witnessing started to become more obvious that it was me and not the mind. And so witnessing allows you to see the distinction between what you are and what is not you. If you're the witness, what is everything else? Who are you really? See, most people think they're the mind. They think they're the ones thinking. They think they're the thinker. They think they're the doer. But that's simply not true. There is something there before the thinker, before the doer. It is the witness. It is the pure awareness of what is happening. And so the endeavor is to keep turning awareness back to that, to discover that as ourselves, because that is ourselves. And it is always here. But most people are caught in dream. They're caught in thinking and rationalizing, analyzing, worrying, procrastinating. Develop a witness that just watches that. And at some point, you can start to find that you are that witness, not the story that it's witnessing, not the drama that it's witnessing. You are just the witness. And then when that becomes aware of itself, bang. It's impossible to think you're an I ever again, because you're not. You are simply pure awareness.
The next question is as follows. With so much access to teachings and practices that raise consciousness, why do you think that not many people succeed in this endeavor?
Because most people collect knowledge, they don't practice. We all went to school and we learned how to collect knowledge and remember it so we could pass exams. And people approach spirituality and higher consciousness with the same methodology, and it does not work. It does not work to collect knowledge. being knowledgeable is actually the booby prize. It's a loser's position. But that's how we were programmed. That's what we were programmed to do, to pass exams and get a degree or whatever we needed to get to continue on. It is only practice that makes a difference. And people fail because they don't practice. They stay true to whatever default patterns they've developed up until 20, and they don't change. If you are contracting over the world, if you're resisting the world, if you're victim orientated, you have a program that is in the way. That program needs to be challenged over and over again until it stops. You can't constantly go into resistance and think that somehow you're going to wake up. That's not going to happen. You have to do the work on your mind to produce a mind that is not going to contract, that is actually going to stay open. And the practice of acceptance teaches you this. But then again, when we look at the practice of just watching the breath, meditation, watching the breath, that is also a practice of surrender, because you're watching the breath, which is real. The mind comes in with its number, the story, and you abandon it. You come back to the breath. You're practicing letting go. You're practicing surrendering. And so meditation teaches the mind to let go of itself, its story, and keep awareness on what is real. But if you don't practice, you don't get good at it. It's a little bit like you want to be good at ping pong or 8-ball, and you read a book on it, and you get very knowledgeable about it. You watch a few videos on it, you get very knowledgeable about it. It's not going to make you a good ping pong player or 8-ball player. Only practice does that. Well, it's the same with everything else in life, including higher consciousness. What do you practice? If all you do is practice listening to spiritual teachers talk about what you should practice, well, that doesn't go to work. You actually have to practice what they say. You have to trust them and practice. And so if we look at Advaita Vedanta, the practice is self-inquiry. But Ramana also talked about removing the obstacles. And I wonder how many people get into that. Anything that contracts you, anything that takes you into resistance is an obstacle, because awareness is going to go back to it. Find a way to undo it. Find a way to remove it. Find a way to develop a mind that is equanimous, a mind that stays level, even when attacked.
Does my teacher need to be enlightened or just more conscious than me?
Yeah, well, my first teachers weren't enlightened, but they were further ahead than I was. I was 19, they were older. They were people who were into personal growth. They taught me about victim-orientated thinking. They taught me about limiting belief systems. Basically, they were teaching me how to remove obstacles that were in the way of success, which just happens to be the same obstacles that needed to be removed for higher consciousness. But they weren't awake. They were just as lost as I was in that respect. But they did know something about the mind, and they did know something about raising consciousness levels through removing limiting programs, limiting belief systems. And so I was with them for 9 years. And then I found Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. Wow, big difference. But still, he taught me how to get free. He taught me how to love. People think, oh, well, I'm loving, I love. Really? How closed are you? Because if you're closed, you won't be perceiving much love. In openness, we perceive love. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, we got closed up when we were kids, just to protect ourselves from feeling pain. And those closures have carried through to our adult years. Well, they need to be let go. We need to open up again. We need to open open and wear our hearts on our sleeves. Openness really does count for everything.
Which one of your teachers would you say affected your consciousness levels the most?
Osho Rajneesh. Because through his teachings and his mystery schools, I had my first satoris, my first glimpses of my true nature. And without that, I don't think I would have gone on further. So he definitely was the great instigator of change in my life. And I'm eternally grateful.
Why do some students leave a spiritual teacher after they find one?
Well, it could be that the spiritual teacher is corrupt. It could be that they don't want to do the work that the teacher's suggesting. If a spiritual teacher is worth their salt, they're teaching people to practice, and some people don't want to practice. They just want to collect knowledge, and so that's what they do. And after a while, they get very stale with it because it hasn't changed their life very much, the collection of knowledge, so they leave. And they go and find another teacher that they can listen to and collect knowledge from until they get stale again and leave that one. The people who practice are the ones that get somewhere, and they can see that their consciousness levels are rising. They're not stuck. If someone is with a spiritual teacher and they're stuck, it's because they're not practicing what's been taught. And people feel stuck, they feel discontented, so they leave. Basically, you come around a spiritual teacher who's teaching different methodologies towards higher consciousness, and you're going to, at some point, have to face your own pain body, whatever you've been carrying for your life. You're going to have to go through the dark night of the soul. Um, Quite often, when people start to have to face whatever they've got repressed inside of themselves, they find it too uncomfortable, so they decide to leave. And they may blame the teacher, they may blame the methodologies, but really, they're just not willing to meet what's inside of themselves. And so they leave. There's lots of reasons people leave. I left Osho Rajneesh because he died. But I never really left him. He's still in my heart.
The following question has been written by Ritu. Is openness a non-doing, or is it something I have to actively do?
No, it's a non-doing. You're right. It's a non-doing. When we were born open. And then we developed ways of being closed to protect ourselves. And so to undo those closures, which we've carried through to adulthood, takes doing. It takes effort to undo closures. But once you've practiced openness long enough, it becomes a default pattern. It's actually a non-doing. And so you meet someone who's really open as an adult, and you're meeting someone who's probably done a lot of work on themselves to actually open up. They've taken time out, they've put the effort in to make it happen. Because we all went through school, we all went through dealing with bullies and peer pressure and whatever else, angry people. And we developed a heap of defense systems over a lifetime. And all of those defense systems are in the way. And so they have to be undone. But once they're undone, the default pattern is openness. There's no doing anymore. It's just that in the beginning, to undo things takes effort. That's all.
The next question is as follows. I've heard people refer to drugs as teachers. Why is this so, and is there any merit in it?
Drugs have been used for thousands of years to give people insight and to show them what's possible. Um, you can take certain drugs that'll knock the ego out, and you get to see all sorts of things. You get to feel the heart because there's nothing in the way anymore. You can get insight from drugs that show you different things, but they're only invitations. They're not the answer. They're invitations to do the work, to do the practice. A lot of people who take drugs, though, for insight, think that the insights are the answer. But the insights are just you collecting more knowledge. That's all they are. Unless you actually practice something that changes you, nothing's really going to change. Insight is an invitation. And so drugs have been used for thousands of years to show people different things about their own psyche and maybe which way to go. But they in themselves, those insights are not the answer. They are the invitation to do the work, to take the mind apart, to do the great undoing of the psyche that is in the way.
Why do spiritual teachers have different kinds of personalities, even though they all teach people to get to enlightenment?
There's no two waves on the ocean that are the same. All the waves are different. They've got a different shape here, a different speed there, a different height, but they're all the ocean. Why wouldn't there be different personalities? After all, everyone's been programmed differently, different genetics, different causal programming from parents, from teachers, from religions. All the personalities are different. Every personality is unique. There's no two personalities that are the same. The same as there's no two waves on the ocean that are the same. But all the waves in the ocean are still the ocean. The same as all the personalities are still beingness.
Do you think it's enough to have a spiritual teacher that you follow online, or do you need to become a personal student of a teacher to progress?
We are in an amazing time right now where we can actually use Zoom or other medias to actually access enlightened people. When I was a seeker, I had to travel to India. I had to be with an awake teacher. I had to travel to America. I had to travel to Italy. I had to travel to England. There weren't any in here in West Australia where I live. There weren't any. I had to travel. I couldn't get on a computer and talk to someone who was awake. That wasn't possible. Nowadays, you can actually access awake teachers online. Quite often they're holding Zoom conferences. And if you're sensitive enough, you'll feel the presence. And it's like being in Satsang because you're feeling the Buddha field. You're not just hearing the knowledge, asking the questions and getting answers. You're feeling the Buddha field. And so we are in an amazing time where spirituality, higher consciousness from awakened ones can be brought into your lounge room. It's brilliant. And so you don't necessarily have to be living or seeing someone who's awake in person, though that would be preferable because they have one intention, and that is to take you apart so you can be free. Whereas if you're just watching someone on Zoom, you can always turn them off. It's a bit hard to turn a teacher off if you're living with them. But Zoom's pretty good. The internet's pretty good because the presence can be transmitted through the internet. I don't know how that works, but but it happens. So if you can't access a teacher, if you can't find one who lives near you, or you can't go and see one, use Zoom, use the internet. Find someone who's awake, who suits you, and listen to them. Find a way to trust them and follow their instruction and practice what they teach until you're free, until you are light so others can see. It's up to you. Nobody's going to do it for you. This is not one of those games where it happens to you. You make it happen. You prepare the mind for enlightenment. You self-inquire. You develop a witness of the mind. You have to do all the work. You can't. The teacher is just a guide. The teacher is just pointing to what you need to do. Maybe supplying a Buddha field so you can actually rest in that, so you can have clarity in that. But a teacher can't do the work for you. Only you can do that. Only you can do the work on yourself. Only you can become a meditator, a self-inquirer. Only you can practice openness. No one can do it for you. A teacher can show you how, and a teacher can supply a Buddha field that you can get clarity from and learn to die in. That's about it. Most teachers are motivational speakers trying to encourage you to go for truth, while at the same time pointing at truth and lighting you up. But that's all they can do. You have to do the work. You have to practice. Thank you for Satsang. Good to see you brave hearts here today.